On this episode of the Photography News podcast, new Nikon kit, 24 hours of photo ideas, and the Imelda Marcos of tripods. Hello and welcome to this latest episode of the Photography News podcast. My name is Roger Payne and I'm the editorial director at Photography News. And in light of Canon celebrating Camera Store Week, I thought I would introduce my two colleagues and ask them to name their favourite camera shop. So let's start with editor of Photography News, Mr. Will Chung. Hi, Will.
Hi, Rog. Hi, Kingsley. How are we doing?
So, favourite camera store. We are recording during Canon's Camera Store Week. So what would you say is your favourite camera store?
Are we talking current camera store, Rog, or something historical?
I think we can talk about a specific branch, historically or current.
I guess one of my favourites, this is partly because I'm a Nikon user, but Greater Westminster in London, in South London, is rather special as a shop. Obviously, it does deal with Nikon only, but when you go in there, it's just wonderful. I mean, I went in there, I did meet Gray Levitt many years ago in that shop. He gave me a tour. He showed me some old classic Nikons, like a Nikon S rangefinder, which I had to play with. And it was just like a kid in a sweet store experience. So if I had to pick a store like which is my favourite currently, which exists, I would say Gray's. If I had to go back a few years, then I did all my, when I was learning photography as a kid, there was a shop literally 3 or 4 doors down from the restaurant my parents used to own called R.E. Davis in Colchester. And I've got very fond memories of going to there and asking for those, random packs of black and white printing paper to use. And it was wonderful. That goes back a long time. But currently, Grays of Westminster.
So 1 vote for Grays of Westminster. So as a fellow Nikon user, contributing editor Kingsley Singleton, you can't have that. You can't have the same one. I see you've been scratching your head for some time while Will has been regaling us of stories of Grays and R.E. Davis. But Kingsley, favourite camera store?
Well, the reason I was scratching my head is I suppose, but I'm only in my early 20s, so I'm a child of the internet, and I've generally bought stuff online. No, I actually the first camera shop that came to mind for me was London Camera Exchange's store in Southampton, which is where I bought my first proper camera, my Zenith. And like that was I think the joy of those sort of places is going in and just sort of browsing around, isn't it? And so like I went in, browsed around, and then obviously went for the cheapest camera I could possibly find to get myself started. I'm trying to think of places I've been to recently. I went and did a job. It was like a kind of a reader day sort of thing at a place called SRS Microsystems, which is in Watford. And that was quite nice because I mean the people that run it were really friendly, and you could tell that they were actually quite into talking to people about stuff, which is obviously a bonus if you work in a camera shop. But it was a big place, and there was lots of stuff to kind of eye up. So yeah, I mean actually it's an interesting point you raise. I'm now sort of thinking like, well, maybe I'll nip into somewhere like Peterborough and see if is the Jessup still there?
I really don't know if it is, although I mean obviously my favourite camera store is a Jessup's because I used to work in the Jessup store in Nottingham on Market Street. Now I'm pretty sure that has now closed down, but no, very happy memories of working there and shifting loads of the units and talking to loads of people about the cameras of the day.
The other thing that's kind of reminded me of is that some time ago, when I think we were talking about vintage lenses and things, Will said how nice it was to wander around camera fairs. And I don't think I've ever been to like a big proper camera fair. I've been to markets where people sell, their stalls, it's kind of individual things, but not to like a kind of a big meet. So I might try and do one of those now things are opening up a little bit more.
Those camera fairs are really good fun, Kingsley. So if you do go, treat yourself to an early bird ticket, which normally it used to be about £5 extra, because it does get you in earlier before the masses go in. And if there are any bargains to be snapped up, a lot of people go there early. So they're wonderful places to wander around. Indeed, in the past, I've had the odd stall there myself.
A camera fair field trip is on the cards. Well, aside from browsing the internet and looking for camera fairs, Kingsley, What have you been photographing?
Well, I tried another landscaping trip, this time to Staffordshire. No, it was Shropshire. Sorry, just a little bit further on towards Welsh Wales. And that was that wasn't a washout for the reasons that I usually have, which is weather. But it was a sort of something of a sort of a camping disaster that I won't go into. What it reminded me of was how painful it is getting up first thing in the morning to try and do landscape photography at this time of year, which I know is something we're going to come on to a little bit later. But I kind of got out this tent at about 5 a.m. thinking, with the brightness, sort of thinking that it was 9 o'clock in the morning, and then looked at my watch and thought it was like something like 5 past 5. This kind of blazing light, and how it was just sort of penetrating the tent. It was mad. But aside from that, because after my sort of fairly abortive Fox photography, I was still borrowing this 500mm f5.6 lens. So I thought I'd have a quick go at kind of birds in the garden and stuff. And I got a few pictures, but again, they were sort of slightly repelled, I think, by the fancy lens. I'm sure if I'd had a completely inappropriate lens, they would have been literally flocking, to me. But one thing that I did realize as I was doing that, and it's something that has kind of occurred to me since I got this grip. I've got the MB-N11 grip for my Nikon Z7 II, which I was very keen on, and I still like very much, because I think it rounds the camera out really nicely, and I'm used to working with like a vertical grip. But when I was first using it, I noticed that there were a few bits of it that are a little bit slippy, where the rubberized coating that you get on the camera and on parts of the grip doesn't quite sort of extend, so like contact areas. And particularly when you're holding the camera horizontally, there's quite a slippy bit under the kind of the pad of your hand. So after some consultation with Will, who advised me to just go and get some sticky tape, I went on to one of those huge online retailers that we're not supposed to mention, and I bought some stuff called grip tape, which I guess is the sort of thing that maybe people put around their tennis racket or something like that. And what I did was I spent like a very pleasurable 25 minutes cutting little bits of it into shape and attaching them to my Nikon grip, and now it is much more grippy.
You are reaching new levels of camera modification by applying tape, which presumably will be fine for maybe a month or so, and then gradually it'll start to peel off and leave an unpleasant sticky residue in its place.
We will see. Yeah, the temptation is to keep applying it to all sorts of other things. But
we'll have a grip tape update on the next podcast. I'm sure people will be desperate to hear how your grip tape situation is going. Interesting stuff, though. What about you, Will? Have you been out and about? I'm sure you've made the most of the weather.
Yeah, I mean, we had a few rainy days, and that was quite nice because we had some fantastic skies. So I did go out and take a few skyscapes. But the weekend, Annie, my partner, was up, and we went for a walk to the local nature reserve with our macro kit. And we found loads of bugs because it was nice and warm. I learned what a common malachite beetle was, which is a little beetle with a bronze rear. And I spent ages chasing these around a little patch of buttercups. And it was a really difficult challenge. They move quite quickly. And as you know, when you get that close with a macro lens, I was using the old 105mm Nikon. I say old, it was the one for the DSLR system. And these things move mightily quickly when you're that close. And the depth of field, even f11, is very little. It's millimeters. So I had a flash setup. I had a Godox AD200 flash. I had a 105 macro lens on my Z7 with an adapter. And I was chasing all these bugs around. And after a while, to be honest, I got a bit tired of these bugs and my back was hurting. So I went for a little wander around where we were, and I found some orchids. Apparently, according to my app, my Seek app, it's a common spotted orchid. And then I spent the rest of the afternoon photographing those. And to be fair, not very successfully. So I went back again last night with the same macro setup, with a tripod as well, a Leo Photo tripod with no center column, so I could get really low. And also took with me something which maybe still photographers don't think about, but maybe they should think about. And that's one of these plug-in monitors. So I had something called a DesView R6 UHB monitor, which is something we're reviewing in the next issue. And the UHB stands for ultra high brightness. So this monitor, it's 5 inches across, 5.5 inches across in terms of the screen size. So it's significantly bigger than the camera's monitor. You plug it into the camera, and what it does is give you this nice big viewing image, and it's really bright. I mean, it's bright enough to use even in sunlight. So when you normally use a camera in this bright sun, you can't really see what's going on. And because I wanted to focus stack this orchid, I took this monitor with me to help see what's going on. And this, so the camera's on the deck, and I was using the camera monitor flipped up. But actually, with this monitor plugged in via the HDMI lead, I was actually more comfortable. I could actually kneel and study the screen that way, and actually very accurately check focusing before I did the focus stack. So the long and the short of it is, I did some focus stacking orchids last time.
But that's definitely something that people wouldn't consider, is sticking an extra monitor onto a DSLR or mirrorless camera. But where's that taking its power from, Will? Is that taking it from the camera, or has it got a separate power source?
No, it's one of these rechargeable batteries, these bulky things that people who shoot video use. So you're not draining any power from the camera, because the camera wouldn't better take it, to be honest. And the battery gives you, the big batteries give you maybe a couple of hours life, so there's plenty of life. And they run a little warm, but I mean, they're not the things you're going to lug around all the time. But if you have to shoot maybe critical subjects like a focus stack in bright light, and it may be an angle which isn't very comfortable, they're a godsend.
And it just sits into your camera's hot shoe, or did you have to have it mounted separately?
You can do a bit of both. I mean, with this particular shoot, I just held it in my hand and rest it on the ground when I wasn't holding it. But yeah, you can get it just mounted on a hot shoe or on a bracket. I mean, all these things, be they LED lights or be they monitor screens, they all fit onto the accessory shoe of your camera nowadays. So it's not normally a problem. But I had great fun with the focus stacking. I only just started looking at the pictures, and I did a quick 12 shot, I think it was, focus stack, and had a quick look at it just now. And yeah, it's sharp, very happy. So even though, one thing I noticed last night, and even on the calmest days, when you start going into the world of macro, the gentlest breeze is like a gale. But despite that, I got some sharp pictures. They stack nicely.
Kingsley, thoughts?
I was about to ask whether the proof was in the pudding. So I'm just waiting with bated breath to see this focus stacked orchid. I think like one of the things that I've noticed when trying it before is how easy it is to kind of like miss a lump of the object or the subject, and then what you then get is this kind of very, very sharp part, which then immediately goes into like a blurred bit, and then maybe comes out again like into sharpness or something. So, but I guess it's just one of those techniques where you are just kind of going for the most kind of fastidious approach possible, isn't it? Almost shooting too much.
Absolutely, and that's where that big screen came in, because I wanted the focus stack to start at the front of the subject, the first petal of the orchid, and end at the last petal. I didn't actually want to go into the background. One, because it takes time, and two, I don't need it, and then you have to sort out the files. So with this monitor, I could very accurately check the front point of focus and the rear point. So I set the near point and let the camera did the rest. I had to experiment a little bit in terms of, because it's kind of a new technique to me, using this Nikon Z7. So I had to shoot how much spacing to need and that sort of thing. But no, it worked really well. And as you say, you have to be a little careful. And I did do a little bit of gardening around the scene. I mean, I didn't touch the orchid, of course, because they're protected, but a little bit of stray grass and other things I did, and the odd bug as well I shooed away. It's great fun. I could thoroughly recommend it if your camera can do it easily. I know you can do it manually, but it's obviously a bit more of a faff. But if you've got a camera that does it automatically, it's well worth trying.
Well, with all this chat about macro lenses, we thought we'd also just round up very quickly some new launches that have come out since we last spoke. And what better place to start than with macro lenses? Because Kingsley, I think you can tell us and regale us about the fact that Nikon has just launched a couple of new macro lenses, which is a first for the Z series. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, kind of going back to the last episode of the podcast, Will was doing a sort of a supermarket sweep style totting up of the different lenses available for different mounts in answer to a reader question. And it shows you kind of how fast moving things are, because, a couple of weeks after that, 4 new lenses have kind of dropped. That's what the kids say, isn't it? They've dropped. But it certainly fills a gap in that lineup, because I think most of the other mirrorless full frame cameras have got sort of dedicated macro lenses, and there are two. There's a 105-2.8 and a 50mm 2.8, macro. And the only, I mean, obviously, aside from the obvious kind of focal length differences, the longer one, the 105 is an S lens, which means it's part of Nikon's sort of top line of Z lenses, and the other one is, well, I don't know, you'd call it sort of S-less or something. Which, I mean, you know, I'm sure it's still great, but it's kind of, I mean, it's smaller and lighter, and it's probably got less sort of, you know, fancy glass in it, and it sort of lacks, like the 105 has got the kind of the little display window where it can tell you stuff about focal length and, you know, the aperture you're using, and it's got like a customizable button on it and stuff like that. But I mean, you know, because of the size difference and things, it's the sort of thing that you could conceivably have both, you know, and use them. And like, you know, we always say with kind of macro lenses, the 50 mil is probably going to work out like a reasonably useful sort of standard lens.
Yeah.
And the 105 would be a nice portrait lens. So, you know, they're not just for macro. And then on top of that, they also announced the development of two very compact lenses, a 28 f2.8 and a 40 mil f2, which are, you know, going to be handy if you want to travel light, and will probably also fit nicely with kind of some of the smaller Z bodies. In fact, actually, having said that, they're all the same size. All the full frame ones are all the same size, aren't they? So it's only the Z50 that's actually smaller, and that's APS-C. So you'd have to apply a crop factor to both those lenses. But I mean, it's more options, isn't it? Like, and so after kind of, like I say, you know, we're talking about kind of what was available for the Z mount last time. Suddenly it feels like a little bit more complete.
And also, Will, we've had a new camera from Olympus, a new pen camera, which is the first for something like that. 5 years.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the Pen EP7 has been the latest camera, and of course, it's the first camera from Olympus since, you know, the camera division got hived off to OM Digital Solutions now. So I'm assuming that this camera is in development with Olympus cameras before it was sold off to this other company, and now it's out and available, which is great news for pen users. I haven't seen the thing yet, haven't seen a demonstration. I've just seen a few pictures. It looks quite interesting. It's got that sort of pen, old-fashioned retro feel, a little pop-up flash, and a monitor that you can use. It flips underneath the camera, interestingly enough, as opposed to some of the cameras that we see where the screen flips up over the top of the camera, and this goes below the camera. So all these people who are into vlogging and selfies can enjoy themselves. And the body is coming out priced at 749 and 849 with a standard zoom. So it's not cheapo cheap, but it's an interesting little camera, and looking forward to seeing it. And just going back to Kingsley's story about the Nikon 105, I saw on the press release there were no detailed specs on it, so I've no idea how heavy this lens is. But having spent the weekend using the old 105 macro lens, which is a bit of a brute, I would have to say, I'm just hoping the new Z lens will be a bit lighter. I may invest.
We are recording on the 9th of June, which means that we are less than 2 weeks away from the longest day of the year. So obviously it'll start getting darker from here on in, just for a slightly depressing thought. So June the 21st, the longest day of the year, midsummer solstice, etc. And what we would have done in the past, a few years ago on Photography News, is we would have been hosting our Photo 24 event, which basically was exactly as it says on the tin. It's an opportunity to take images for a 24-hour period. We'd get a load of readers down to London and set them off on various tasks to go out and about and take as many pictures as they possibly could. We're not doing that this year for obvious COVID-related reasons, but we thought that's no reason not to give you a few ideas that if on June the 21st or there and thereabouts you and a bunch of your mates wanted to get together and do a 24-hour photo challenge, we thought we'd give you a few ideas as to what you can actually photograph during that 24-hour period. So, Kingsley, given that your experience when you were away on your ill-fated camping trip, why don't we start off with sunrise, because it seems to be something that you're quite familiar with. I mean, I suppose maybe the first question is, how does sunrise differ from a sunset? Because the sun's doing the same thing, kind of, i.e. it's quite low in the sky, etc. So how do the two situations differ?
sunrise, particularly this time of year, is somewhat antisocial. Probably, a hell of a lot more antisocial than sunset. Although, having said that, this time of year, sunsets sort of 9 o'clock, you might well prefer to be in the pub. I mean, there are complications at either end, but like in terms of kind of photographically, I think sunrise, you're looking at possibly sort of cleaner light, less haze, maybe more mist because the sun is kind of picking up a little bit of the kind of moisture, but certainly sort of less heat haze than you would kind of get in the evening. And obviously, there's other stuff to be factored in, like, again, typically this time of year, no one's going to be around for a sunrise, so you're going to have sort of empty scenes and not too many people asking you what the hell you're doing. Whereas sunset, the streets are still going to be sort of fairly crowded. You're looking at all the usual kind of benefits of low angle light, where you're kind of picking up kind of detail in subjects, whether that's buildings or landscapes. And you're looking at warmer light, a little bit more contrast in there. So, I think it's kind of it's the time of day that suits itself to scenics or architectural shots, depending on where you are.
Yeah, so I was going to come on to saying, if you were crazy enough to set your alarm for 4:30 and want to get out and get going, where would you suggest would be the best places to go? Are there sort of hot spots scenically that will look better at sunrise than they will do at sunset, for example?
Not necessarily. I think, like, as you were sort of saying that, I was thinking that there is a level of planning involved, and obviously we've several times mentioned before apps like Photographer's Ephemeris and Photo Pills. But in your own sort of mental outlook, you might imagine that you can head to a certain location at sunrise, and think that it's going to look great. But I had the same thought about sunset yesterday, and I thought I might nip over to the edge of town and take a picture of a church. But then I checked the app and I realized the sun was going to be directly behind it from where I wanted to shoot it. So, like, little things like that, sort of have a think about them the night before and kind of where you need to be.
And getting somewhere in good time as well, presumably. So actually, if you want to be getting the right light at this time of the year, you've probably got to be setting your alarm for 3:30, 4 o'clock, right?
I wouldn't go to bed.
Well, Will never does. I mean, he'll just be getting home from the pub, I would have thought, at that sort of time.
I wish.
I think the thing that you've also got a kind of, I mean, it's a nice time of year to do it as well, because obviously it's not going to be freezing cold. Getting out of bed and going to these kind of places. And yeah, if you do get there early, you've got sort of that kind of, the same as you do get in sort of later in the day, you've got that kind of that sort of blue hour, where the light's just coming into the sky and you can get kind of images with much more sort of subtlety, without kind of like direct lighting.
So Will, once people have been up and about at sunrise and are well on their way with their 24-hour photo shoot, I always seem to recall from Photo 24 that actually some of the toughest periods to fill were basically during the day. So the sort of morning and afternoon, where you've got the sun, right up above and causing all sorts of problems in terms of flat lighting. So what would you turn to at that time, apart from a bottle, obviously? What would you turn to at that time to go off and photograph when the light is, really quite harsh?
Gotta just say, I don't know where you two get the idea that I'm a boozer, because it's completely the opposite.
It's those 3 bottles of red in front of you, Will. That's what's giving it away.
I did get through Photo 24, which was, as you recall, quite hard work. But obviously it depends where you are. I mean, this is the thing as well, because in London, where we did Photo 24, one thing we had was, if there was something going on, like a market, for instance, there was your photo opportunity. And often in the afternoon, where we did Photo 24, there'd often be, one of these political walks or a gathering at the Houses of Parliament or something like that. So there was your photo op. Now, if you live somewhere a little more parochial than that, a bit more provincial than that, there might be nothing going on, and that's where the struggle is. So you may move away from people or photography. You may do things like, as I've done in the past, I'll just find a local wood and maybe get the macro lens out and do some micro landscapes. So something where the harsh light is not so much of an issue. And of course, we are assuming now that the sun is shining, and it doesn't always shine in this country, as you've probably noticed. So some days it may be quite flat, and I think that's when the challenge is again. But that said, I mean, I'll probably wander off into the wood and get some macro shooting done, things like that. And And in terms of locations, if I was down at the beach, which is maybe if I got up early for sunrise at a crack of dawn and got round to a nice beach, I'll probably just hang around there and shoot loads of detail. And I don't have a problem with the harsh light. I know it's not light which is pretty in the accepted Joe Cornish way, but you can get some good shots in harsh light. You maybe go black and white, for instance, and use the harshness. Or if you have an infrared converted body, which I know Kingsley has, because he bought my old one, and I've got one as well. You can shoot infrared, which works really well when the sun is high in the sky. So don't write it off, but equally don't work it too hard. And if you have got up at the crack of dawn and you are fading a little bit by mid-morning, yeah, put your feet up, go have a nice bit of lunch, take it easy, and get ready for the afternoon session.
Will, you're quite an advocate of shooting long exposures, and you mentioned there about being at the beach. I mean, is there any sort of so in like really bright sunlight, if you've got a 10 stop ND filter on stuff, presumably that's still a perfectly decent time to have a go at shooting some long exposure stuff, is it? Or would you generally wait until later in the day to do that type of thing?
It depends, Ross. Depending on what the sky's doing, and obviously if you have got the beach and there's water around, then that's moving. But I generally like to have something moving in the sky, and it's not hopefully something not too contrasty as well, because that can be a real problem. So it depends. I mean, you would cut your cloth according to what's going on. So there is opportunity for long exposures, and you probably might need, if you wanted a few minutes on your exposure, you would have to go for a 15 stop with super stopper filter as opposed to a big stopper filter, because you want to get exposures into the minutes as opposed to maybe 10, 15 seconds. But depending on what's going on, I certainly wouldn't roll it out, Roger. It's certainly worth a thought.
I was going to jump in on the long exposure thing, because obviously, like when you're in the city, there's a good contrast to be had. If you do have a little bit of sky detail, preferably kind of, I don't know, like 50% around sort of cloud cover, so little fluffy clouds kind of going past. You start framing that up against buildings. That's when you really start to make sense of those kind of long exposures. Like if you're shooting, and like as Will says, there's nothing moving. It's kind of like you do see differences, because if you're shooting a long exposure that's like a minute long, you'll sort of notice like more softness in it, because the sun is moving ever so slightly kind of during that exposure. But it's really the movement that you're looking for. But something else that you can do in towns is look for moving people. Now, right now, there aren't going to be huge groups of people moving around, but I think probably a lot of people have seen these wonderful sort of images where people have done long exposures in train stations, where you just get this kind of, the people turn into like a river of kind of blur and motion, and like that, that those can be great things to look for kind of during the day, I think.
One other thing I was going to mention, which I thought is quite viable during the day, is street photography. In terms of, because a lot of the street photography you tend to see online nowadays has got really heavy contrast, where people are actually actively looking for heavy shadow areas and sort of bright highlight areas, so that they can really create a strong contrast between the two. So presumably that's an option as well, in terms of if you're not at the beach, or if you're in somewhere that's more urban, then looking for those areas of high contrast to actually capture sort of street images, and then just parking yourself somewhere and waiting for somebody to walk into shot or walk out of shot could be a way forward as well. Kingsley, I was going to come to you and ask about sort of portraiture. Will sort of dismissed it as a kind of idea of shooting portraits during the day, but as a celebrated dog photographer such that you are, I know that you, certainly in your own household anyway, I know that you enjoy taking pictures of, or portraits of, dogs in sort of the middle of the day, but often they're in shaded areas or backlit. So, what's your approach there?
Well, I'd point out that the opinion of me being a good dog photographer is divided even within the house. The spaniel thinks so, but the Shepsky doesn't. So yeah, but I mean that's kind of that's the perfect point. Is that if you look for shade could be anything from the cover of the corner of a building to, like Will mentioned, kind of going into kind of wooded areas, or even finding a good one is just finding a tree in a park and kind of parking the subject just sort of on the edge of where the light is, so they're not in direct sunlight, but also they're not in too much shade, because at that point you end up getting too much contrast between the background and kind of what's on the subject. So it's almost like people are sort of familiar with lighting with flash and using softboxes, where you might hear the term feathering, where you use the side of the softbox, the side of the light, or the side of any light source really. But that's what you're doing in those situations. You're putting the subject sort of in the shade, but with still enough reflected light to kind of give them a little bit of kind of illumination. And then you get these really nice kind of defocused highlights behind them. And that can work particularly well with dogs, because obviously there's a lot of fuzz involved, so you're getting a kind of a nice kind of glow around them.
And in terms of like shaded areas, I mean, I don't take very many dog pictures of my dog, but one of the ones that I'm very happy with is where I actually got him to sit just in a doorway, but just slightly out, just slightly back from where the actual door edge was, so to speak. And the light was beautiful. It was a bright sunny day outside, but the light, because it wasn't direct onto that doorway, it was really beautiful, and it got a very nice even light all over his black fur, which was always a challenge, but does produce something nice.
If you are wanting to do portraits, that's kind of half the journey, isn't it? That you are looking for light and looking for backgrounds and looking for kind of places to put people where you're going to get those kind of effects that you want. And it's kind of like, even if you could be doing this in your own home, and therefore you will start to understand how the light moves around your own home and kind of different kind of parts of it, or if it's a part of a city or an office or whatever that you're actually familiar with. You can start to kind of draw up like a mental list of the places where you can be successful, I guess.
Reminds me a little bit of the trauma of photographing weddings, when you didn't want it to pour down, but then equally you didn't want it to be really, really hot and sunny, because A, you'd be absolutely knackered by the end of it because you're running around and not drinking enough water, generally speaking. But B, you always then had to deal with that problem, like, right, where am I going to group everybody together? Because there's so much light going on.
Yeah, and I think like if you can't find shade and you do want to take pictures or you need to take portraits, then just turn them away from the sun. Like I did that at an event once. It was a group shot, and someone broke out of the group and came over to me and said, "I don't know if you know, but the sun is actually behind us." And I was like, "Yes, yeah, don't worry, I've done it for a reason." And I guess they were expecting everyone to turn out like a silhouette, but fortunately they didn't, because you're obviously either manually exposing a little bit, overexposing slightly manually, or you're using some exposure compensation to make it a little bit brighter. But obviously I just put them all into silhouette anyway, out of spite. Yeah, you were right.
Yeah, you were right, mate. You should have just handed in the camera. Here you go. Carry on. Marvellous. Well, okay, good stuff to shoot during the day when the sun's high in the sky there. But, I mean, Will, you've heard Kingsley's sort of sunrise explanation. Anything different that you would do at sunset, or would you broadly agree with what he had to say there?
I broadly agree, but Roger, we missed out that little bit between afternoon and sunset, which is the evening. So I thought maybe we should talk about that first.
Let's do that, shall we? I never get the times of the day right.
For me, that's a great time for the sort of street photography you're talking about, using figures in a landscape, but also wonderful shadows to be had. It has been known for me to follow people on the street, if you know what I mean, looking for shadows. That doesn't sound suspicious at all, does it? But no, I mean, I had a little project on shadows, so I did go around on a few occasions with my nose to the ground, following people's shadows and trying to get them in nice positions. But when the sun gets lower in the sky, that's a great time to shoot. But work quickly. That's the only thing I would say. And like most of these things, a bit of planning is a good thing. So when you do get the sunset, you've got a pretty good idea where it's going to go. By looking up during the course of the evening, you know what sort of clouds doing. I mean, a lot of the cumulus goes away, and you get less cloud cover often, but you might get a mackerel sky, which can be quite nice. But sunrise and sunset, you just need a good location, good foreground, good strong shapes. Consider using filters as well. Things like graduate filters come into their own during sunset and sunrise to help control the contrast between the foreground and the bright sky. But my thing with sunsets at the moment is, having just acquired a long telephoto zoom, I like just shooting just the orb of the sun with a few clouds around it. Obviously, if you do that, and if anybody does that, please take great care with looking through a viewfinder, or you don't. Use a monitor, and then you can compose that way. And you can get some really interesting shots. And the other thing I would say then, if you are shooting sunsets, is bracket and maybe merge pictures afterwards. I would bracket a lot and then merge HERs in Lightroom afterwards, because that gives you a bit more control about what's going on. Because there is, an enormous amount of contrast when you shoot a sun with not much cloud cover on it, and shoot quickly, because the sun does. Well, I say the sun moves quickly. The sun's not moving, of course. We're moving quickly, and the pictures change from minute to minute. So shoot quickly.
So sunset and then into evening, because obviously when the sun goes down, there's still light in the sky as long as you're pointing in the right direction. So you probably get a window of maybe, I don't know, an hour and a half, perhaps something like that you can actually still sort of actively take pictures. But then when it's gone completely black in the sky, that is another, it's almost like that's as big a challenge as it would be shooting right in the middle of the day when the sun's high in the sky. So Kingsley, your experience of photographing on Photo 24 when it's pitch black in the sky, what would you advise people to do then? What's the best way to go from a total nighttime perspective in terms of what to shoot then?
I think, obviously there's lots of different subjects you can tackle, but the one that's springing to mind is kind of urban scenes. And if you're looking for those, one of the things, it's kind of one of those, I'll probably get jumped on for this. It's like a personal bugbear, but I don't like urban scenes where the kind of the rooftops and stuff just disappear into the sky, because the sky is black. You can't see the top of the building. It's like there's sort of lack of definition. So what I would try and do is find areas that are lit enough that give you a bit of an option, kind of in that regard. And then also sort of have a think about the same way as you might do at sunset. Like Will was saying about maybe using telephoto lenses to shoot the sunset. I quite often would shoot sunset with wide angle lenses and try and make the sun kind of part of the scene, as almost as the focal point. It can be very useful as a focal point, the sun, and then you just sort of, you're looking at texture in the rest of the image. And you can do that same thing after dark. If you find a big bright light somewhere, then it can create really interesting contrast in the rest of the scene, even if it's just like a road or a kind of a street scene. And there's like a kind of it's something like Ridley Scott used to say about cinematography. There's something, this is probably completely made up, but there's something that was attributed to him was, you find the brightest light and point your camera towards it, and then you start building up the scene based on that. And what that does is it gives you all this kind of like backlighting and definition to stuff. So and there's if you are in a city, there's plenty to be found, kind of along those lines.
And then things also will, like traffic trails, that kind of stuff, that don't include much of the sky, but you could sort of get reasonably low down at a road or over a bridge or something like that, where you can get traffic trails. Worth or not worth a try at that time of the night? I
think, well, it obviously again depends where you are, because this time of year where it doesn't get properly dark until 10:30, 11 o'clock. There's plenty of twilight to be enjoyed. So I don't know what Kingsley's got against the top buildings not being visible, but maybe he needs a therapist. But the fact is, there's an awful lot to be shot during that time of twilight. And then, as you say, light trails is good if there's traffic around. And of course, much later in the evening, much later in the evening, not far from sunrise again. And at this time of year, and if you're out in a suitable area, is having a go at the Milky Way. It's not something you can do in the city, but if you are away from bright lights, and every year I seem to see loads and loads of pictures of Marazion with the Milky Way above it, St. Michael's Mount, and it's not super dark down there, but it must be visible. But that's worth consideration as well. And obviously it depends what time of the month we're in terms of the lunar cycle. But certainly, I think early July is a moonless time of the month, and Andy and I are planning to go away and maybe try and find the Milky Way to photograph. But yeah, it depends where you are. And I certainly love floodlit buildings. There's always churches that are often lit to be photographed. And of course, if you feel daring, try light painting. Ooh. And get the bright torches out. Or if you're feeling really brave, get the wild wool out and try some wild wool spinning. And I remember somebody wanted to do that on one of the Photo 24s. And I did think if listeners aren't aware of the techniques, but basically getting a piece of wire wool, attaching it to a lanyard, setting light to this wire wall and then spinning it very quickly above your head. And what the camera records it as all these orange sparks. I remember somebody at Photo 24 said, I want to do it around London. And I said, look, don't say you're anything to do with Photo 24, because the odds are in London with so many closed circuit TV cameras, somebody's going to see you and somebody's going to report you, and they're going to come chasing after you, asking you what the hell you're doing with fire in the middle of London. But sure enough, these guys went and did it. I don't know if you saw it. It's a picture of the bridge somewhere.
It was where, was it not the wobbly bridge or the Millennium Bridge? Was that where it was?
They must have done it at a real quiet time, because obviously you don't want to do it when other people are around. But I think I've got the impression they did a couple of spins and then scarpered quite quickly. I mean, to be fair, there is no fire risky in wild ball spinning unless you're really stupid and careless. If you're doing in a field full of dry grass, for instance, clearly that's irresponsible. But if it's done safely and you have some water handy, or a fire extinguisher, or one of those cloths you use to put out fires with, which I've done in the past, then it's fair enough. But I remember those guys doing it on Photo 24, and they got some good results. And I think if you're in a location and you can do this safely, that's something else to have a bit of fun with. And if it's a group of you, you can take turns spinning and take turns photographing. So you can have a bit of fun with it.
Absolutely. Loads of really good ideas there, chaps. And I suppose one thing just to close this section off is we've both done this, or we've all done this, and been up for 24 hours and gone through it. But what about the kit that we chose to take with us? Because if you are going to go out for a 24-hour shooting marathon, you need to make sure that you don't take too much kit, but you have the right kit. So Kingsley, when you did it, what kit did you take with you?
I think one time I kind of went for that kind of Holy Trinity approach of having like a fast wide angle zoom, a standard, and then a sort of a 24 the 70 to 200. But I think like that was probably the most I'd want to take. I mean, I kind of feel like, obviously you can do one of those things where you can combine like a 24-hour project with using a single lens and just kind of test yourself creatively in that kind of way. But I would definitely kind of definitely suggest thinking very carefully about kind of what you take and what sort of bag you take, because you like if you take a shoulder bag in particular, you definitely don't want to overfill it, because that's going to kill you. Whereas like and it's the same with a backpack. Really, a backpack, everyone thinks backpacks are more comfortable, but only up to a certain point. That they're still going to become kind of quite and you don't want to. Part of the process is kind of remaining energetic and into it, and the first thing that's going to sap your enthusiasm is kind of collapsing under the weight of your own gear.
Will, any thoughts on kit?
Well, Roger, I remember when you came along to a couple of the Photo 24s, you brought along just a compact camera, which is no bad idea at all. And the things about this, and I've written about this many times, because Photo 24, I think it's happened for 6 or 7 years. And I remember each year I would say, look, travel lightly, take along a small little tripod. Don't bring along your man-sized tripod. Don't bring every lens you own on Photo 24. And I remember writing these things, and then when people checked in on the event itself, I'd be standing there at registration, and people came in with roller cases full of stuff, and they're the biggest tripod in the world. And I thought, good grief, how are you going to do this? And how are you going to cope with public transport and all the rest of it? So I will say, regardless of what we say, chaps, we will be ignored, and that's perfectly fine. But from my perspective, I prefer to just take the Kingsley approach. I'll take maybe 3 lenses, a travel tripod of some sort, a couple of filters, a sling bag, and lots of water and snacks, and of course the aforementioned red wine.
There is also the much talked about super zoom, which obviously Will's 24 to 200 escaped a pounding recently, didn't it? And that can be a good lens to kind of to occupy you throughout the day.
Absolutely. So right, good stuff. Yes, I did take a compact, Will, and I was very glad for doing that, to be honest. And the battery lasted the whole time, but that was largely because I didn't take very many pictures. But you do get you can get quite frustrated by its limitations, but you have to kind of work with those limitations. So yeah, I'm definitely an advocate of traveling light and maybe just using one camera and one lens. Some really good stuff there, guys. Photo 24, we hope will be coming back maybe next year. But if you would like some further inspiration, then by all means go back and look at previous issues of the magazine. All of our previous issues are on the website, which is www.photographynews.co.uk. Let's answer some reader questions. All of these people who got in touch with us on the podcast@photographynews.co.uk email address. If you've got a question that you'd like us to answer, then please do get in touch using that method, or you can get in touch with us using social media. We're on @PhotoNewsPN on Instagram, Twitter and Facebook. So, well, I'm going to come to both of you on this, so I'll start with you, Kingsley. This is a question from Fran Cook, who emailed this one in saying, can the team share their thoughts on camera and lens servicing, please? I wouldn't say I mistreat my kit, but it does get a few knocks and scrapes. Would you advise that I get my kit looked at? If so, by which companies and how often? Kingsley, are you a servicer?
Or a servicee? Yeah, well, in my experience, it is would be to go to the experts and not necessarily risk damaging something further. I mean, I don't think anyone is about to kind of, service their own lenses, but a lot of people have a go at cleaning their own sensors, and lots of people have great results doing that, and they become very good at it themselves. Some years ago, I used a company called Fixation, who gave a service to 24 to 70 and a 7200 I had, and both of those certainly felt a lot more smooth in use afterwards. I couldn't necessarily say whether the image quality was improved. I think it was more that they're getting a bit graunchy. These things kind of, they get bumped around enough, eventually they kind of come a little bit sort of loose and wear out, don't they? But the other aspect of it, there's Bunks, my dog, is disagreeing with me.
Well, you did say your spaniel doesn't agree with much of what you say.
Yeah, he's because he's got his own sensor licking business, and I had sensor cleaned at that point, and I also had the sensor cleaned once at the flash center in the. It's not actually still there. It was. Will remind me where it was. The flash.
It was the Brunswick Centre before, but
yes.
they've moved from there since.
Yes, and I had I popped in there once and had sensor cleaned because it was a bit grubby, and like that was a great process because you're getting a pro to do it, and it doesn't take very long, and it's not really that expensive compared to the cost of damaging the equipment that you're trying to save.
So you're definitely an advocate of getting camera kit serviced reasonably regularly, or when you feel it needs it. Will, what about you?
I mean, looking at the question, Rog, from Fran about camera servicing, and he doesn't mistreat his kit, but he gets a few knocks and scrapes. My kit definitely gets the odd bang, and I don't treat it particularly well, I don't suppose. But you know what? I don't think I've ever had my kit serviced. I've had kit repaired. I mean, that's not because of anything else other than failure. For instance, I did have a shutter go in one of my cameras when I was on holiday once, and that's nothing to do with mistreatment or lack of servicing because it's a newish camera. But that was just because it went wrong, and I got it repaired under guarantee. But I personally, I haven't had kit service. I'm not a pro that shoots, hundreds and hundreds of frames every day in all sorts of weathers. If I was a sports photographer shooting, in heavy rain regularly and things like that, yeah, I'll get it serviced. But as an enthusiast photographer, it still takes thousands of pictures. I must admit, I haven't worried about it. And in terms of a dirty sensor, and I have had dirty sensors like everybody else has had. And I did have one the other day when I photographed the sky, and I've got a gadget called an Arctic butterfly, which is a handy little gadget, and I clean my sensor with that, and that with some some swabs and some sensor cleaning liquid, I'm sorted. So I have cleaned my sensor myself in the past. I'm not saying I make a great job of it, but it seems to be serviceable. Yes, if I could get an expert to do it, yeah, that's great, but it's not often I get the chance. And maybe if there's, for instance, the photography show, if that happens this year, I know some companies often have a sensor cleaning centre in the show. So if that happens this year, I'll certainly take my kit along. But no, I'm very much just get on with it, really. I haven't had a problem, so why bother?
Well, there you go, Fran. A couple of views there. I think it basically comes down to whether or not you feel your kit is requiring a service. You'll probably know whether or not, like as Kingsley says, it's a bit graunchy on the lens, or you just feel it just could do with being looked at. Then it's obviously worthwhile. But don't do it, I don't think, as a matter of course necessarily. So, Kingsley, I'm going to come to you on this one as well. And this one comes from Derek Keys, and he said, I'd like to have a go at drone photography, but I'm a bit vague on the rules. Do I need a license for one, or any form of training, or can I go into the countryside near where I live and have a go? Now, Kingsley, you are a droner, I believe, so you're a servicer and a droner. So can you offer Derek any kind of advice, or is the law a little bit woolly on this one?
Well, I think that frankly it is. There is a lot of inconsistency in the law, and just to kind of go back to the idea of me, I am a drone owner. I would not say I was a regular drone flyer, because it's just one of those things that I like. Yeah, a few years ago, I bought a DJI Mavic Pro 2, flew it about 4 times, and then recently chopped it in and replaced it with a much smaller one, a DJI Mini 2. And the reason for that was I thought, well, I may stand more chance of using it because it is smaller and it fits more easily into a bag. And also that brings us on to the legislation, which is that drones under a certain weight limit do have fewer restrictions. Now, those restrictions have changed about 3 times in the last 2 years, because there are more and more drones out there, and people are kind of struggling to keep up with the specifications and kind of protect all sorts of issues, like issues of safety, issues of privacy. If you come back to the idea of weight, you do kind of circumnavigate some of the issues of safety, because obviously, you know, the Mavic Mini 2 that I've got is only 249 grams. So if it falls on someone's head, it's probably not going to kill them. Whereas the Mavic Pro 2, I think, probably weighed like over a kilogram, and that coming down from 120 meters is going to cause much more of a problem. So in terms of all I would say is, if you're a bit vague on the rules, don't risk it. Go to the Civil Aviation website. There's a very, very clear process you can go through, which actually you have to do to get your drone registered. And most of the time you have to display an operator ID now as well, if your drone is, if it has a camera on it, basically. The really small toys you don't have to worry about, but things, even light drones with cameras, you have to register and put an operator ID on them. And arguably all this will change again in a few months' time. So I think you just have to kind of, you know, it is keeping yourself informed. And I don't think the advice isn't super clear on the CAA website, but it gives you enough information as to what you're not supposed to do. And those things include stuff like, don't fly it around sort of within a certain distance of an airport. And you can get a very handy app, which I think is called Drone Assist, which basically displays a map showing you where you can't fly. And if you're in one of those zones, like it's just totally just not worth the bother. Because arguably, even outside of those zones, you're probably going to get people coming up to you and saying, why are you flying a drone? Which I suppose in some ways is the same as people kind of coming up to you in the middle of London saying, why are you taking a picture? And at which point you can get into a philosophical argument. But ultimately, it's not illegal to fly a drone in many places, but there are surprising places where it is. Like, some of the new rules mean that it's a bit touch and go to fly even over like a deserted beach, or like or sort of areas of industry, you know, which a lot of people like flying over to take these kind of, you know, interesting kind of flat lay pictures. One of the things you can do to kind of get around a certain amount of the rules is to get this. The Civil Aviation does a certificate called A2C of C, which does allow you to fly. But what that obviously does is that also means that you're much more aware of the rules, sort of in doing so. And therefore, if you do decide to break the rules and you have this certificate, then you're probably going to be a lot more likely to be prosecuted, because someone could say, well, look, you did the course.
So since you bought your Mini 2, to downsize and make it more likely that you'll fly a drone, how many times have you flown it?
Once. That was 3 weeks ago, because for me, it's as much about like a bit of a sort of a mental barrier. Like I really want to do those pictures, and I've actually got some plans to do some actual sort of long exposure photography from the drone in some. So you can buy strong ND filters for your drone, same way as you can for your camera.
Right.
Then you can do all sorts of sort of interesting motion effects and kind of things like that. And one of my realizations is that I've just got to push myself to do it. And so I sense the same. I have the same sort of trepidation about rules and things as Derek does. But to answer his question, if you go out in the countryside near where you live and there's no one around and you're not in a no-fly zone, yes, you can fly your drone and practice with it. As soon as you're over a crowd or something like that, or you're near pylons, you don't do it.
Well, that's definitive enough for me. I'll take that. Hopefully that's definitive enough for Derek as well. Thank you. If you've got a question, as I said at the start of this section, then get in touch with us on podcast@photographynews.co.uk. So that just leaves us, gentlemen, as we wrap up this 26th podcast, for a Will's word of wisdom. So Will, what have you got for us this time round?
Well, I was thinking tripods, Rog. I've got various tripods for various purposes. In the same way, I suppose, I have the same thing for bags. I have a backpack, I have a roller case, I have a sling bag, I have a shoulder bag. And I just wondered if perhaps our listeners should think about their tripods in the same way. Don't just have one tripod. Have maybe your heavyweight studio tripod, have a lighter tripod, have a mini tripod, and just think about it and just maybe update what you have. You may have a tripod which is going on in a few years. It may be aluminium and it's quite weighty and you haven't used it for a while. And maybe it's because I haven't thought about going carbon fiber and going for something lighter, a bit more portable, a bit more usable. So it was just a thought, like I said, something from the chat we've had today about tripods. So just consider what you have, and maybe you need to think about buying more than one. It's not weird. It's quite normal, I think, for photographers to have more than one tripod. I'm sure you guys have more than one tripod.
Well, that is obviously the next question. If a photographer can never have too many tripods, Kingsley, how many tripods do you own?
What, you want an actual number?
Yeah.
I reckon I've got 6 or 7 tripods.
There we go. Proves my point, you see, Rog.
7 tripods.
But I think partly it's something that you just accumulate. Like you accumulate too many. Like if people are kind of shaking their heads at that, like, well, how many pairs?
I'm shaking my head.
How many pairs of shoes do you own? Like you own more pairs of shoes than you need, and part of that is not just to do with the practicalities of what each tripod gives you. It's also about the pleasure of using different things.
Yeah, but I can use more than one pair of shoes in one day. I need lots of shoes. I don't think I've even got 7 pairs of shoes, I'll be honest. Will, how many tripods? Come on, let's have a tripod off.
I must have 6, and 1 or 2 of them are getting a bit rackety. I mean, things I do a lot of photography at the coast and have tripod legs in the sea, and although I do rinse them down, I do clean them. Inevitably they corrode and things happen to them. And I think, like Kingsley said, that sometimes you buy a new tripod because you just fed up with scrunchy legs and you can't clean it. It's a bit rickety, and because they do wear. So I've probably got 6.
Okay, well, I've got a much more modest 2. I've got a carbon fibre one and an aluminium one, and that is all you need. So old 7 and 6 tripods over there are just clearly showing off, but the hunt is now on.
I'm going to add, I've got another one as part of a telescope.
So you've got 8 tripods. Right, the hunt is now on. If there is anybody out there who has more than 8 tripods, we want documentary photographic evidence to prove that you own more than 8 tripods. But as Kingsley has set the standard with 8 tripods, Will, I think that's the perfect time to end. Thank you very much, first of all, to Mr. 6 Pods and editor of Photography News, Will Chung. Thanks, Will.
Pleasure, Rog. Take care, guys.
We'll see you soon. and also to Great Bear 8 Pods, Mr. and contributing editor, Mr. Kingsley Singleton. Thanks, Kingsley.
Henceforth to be known as Octopod.
How many pairs of shoes have you got, just out of interest?
Oh, hundreds.
Oh my God, it's Imelda Marcos. You're the Imelda Marcos of tripods. Good Lord. We'll leave it on that note. Thanks very much. We'll see you again soon. Bye.